My mother and father, my father was Howard Ball Sr., mother was Harriet Virginia Berta Stevens Ball, and she was a very, very devout Episcopalian. One side of our family was in the Episcopal Church, the other side was in the Reformed Church. My uncle Frank Marion was a warden here for many, many years. And Aunt Carrie had a special pew in the back that when you came in church and got in her pew, you were in trouble. Actually, when I came into the church and was baptized back there, was Father Albertson. And then there was another priest right after him. Miller. Father Miller. And then the love of my life came here, Father Albert Chilson. He was, he's the reason I'm whatever I am. He was a great priest and a wonderful human being. He was the rector here from 1935 on. So he came here when I was 6 years old. And I remember the first time I saw him. And I was very sick. I had something that had grown on my neck, and it was a very painful situation. And Father Chilson came to visit, and I was in the living room of 124 Romaine Avenue, and sitting on the couch and trying to not be painful. And he asked me why I had suspenders and a belt on at the same time. Asked me if I was a pessimist. And I didn't know what a pessimist really was. And so then he explained that to me and sat next to me and laid hands on me and prayed for me. It made me feel better. And I decided, I think right there, that wherever he went, I would go with him. He kind of inspired me as you know, in my youth. So. We were in the middle of the Depression. Daddy was fortunate. He worked at Artistic Weaving, and he only lost a very small time, but we hosted members of our family. My uncle and aunt who lived in Ringwood burned out, and they lost the house. And they came down, and there was no question. They just moved in with us. And I don't have a recollection of how long they stayed, but it was months. And it was that was what the family did. What the family could do. And one of the things they did was come down here and make this their church home. And Mama loved Christ Church, and so did Daddy. My father always walked down here on Christmas Eve for the candlelight service, but he walked. He wouldn't drive a car. I don't know whether he got that from the Jewish congregations or not, but it was snowing or whatever. Papa insisted that we all walk down here, and that was a part of our life. I never forget it. I never can remember a time in my childhood when this wasn't the most important part of our life. We had Halloween parties and the Guild Hall, and we had so many things that happened. And eventually Father Chilson brought me a little book. It's called Little Samuel. And I read the little book, and it was the calling of Samuel in the scripture. And he said, if God has a calling on you, then you have to answer him. And I felt that God had a calling on me to be his acolyte. And so when I got old enough, and he didn't cut any corners. When I was old enough, I did become his acolyte. And we traveled a lot together. We went to Ringwood after the 8 o'clock service here. we left, we went up to Ringwood, had a 9 o'clock service there. And one of the things that I remember and makes me grin a little bit was that there were quite a few what we call colored people then, Native Americans or whatever. And we were baptizing, and he baptized this little baby, and as he always did, after he was done, he kissed the baby. And the mother said, "Boy, you just kissed a black baby." And he said, "Oh, did you know the blackest berries have the sweetest juice?" And that was so typical of him to do those kind of things. I know that there was a movement up in Ringwood at one time for a not too acceptable kind of church. We call them Shelton Methodists, Holy Rollers, and things like that. Now I'm Pentecostal, but that was then. And they were going to have a big barbecue on Sunday, but our bishop was coming for confirmation. It was going to be in Ringwood. So Father Chilson and I went to the fire department, and we got a vehicle that had a PA in it, and you could put a record on and play. And he got me to get all my jazz records and all of the big band stuff, and we rode around in Ringwood playing that in the morning and asking people to come to the church service, and we filled the place. And they all wanted to come down and hear the music. Well, they heard the bishop, and it was. But those were the kind of. We spent a lot of time delivering pence cans. That we had little tin cans, and you put pennies in there, and then we sent them out, and I would put all the labels on these, and we put them in boxes, and then drive around to the individual parishioners and drop off the box. And he would say, "I'll be back at the end of the month to pick it up," and he would. We'd go back and pick them up. I don't know what kind of money we made on those things, but it was a time when the church needed money. It's when that little church back there, back of you, came into being, and we put money in it on our birthdays. And I'll tell you, when you put a penny, and you're 7 years old, and you put 7 pennies in, that was a lot of money. You could buy a lot of little candies for 7 cents. So, we existed during that time. I was little. My Sunday school teacher, in order to stop me from carrying on, said that I could sit next to Dottie Marish. And so I was sitting next to Dottie Marish, and I wouldn't carry on or do anything bad when I was next to her, because I just wanted to sit next to Dottie Marish. And I was only 7 or 8 years old at the time. You know how those youthful things happen to you. Praise God. I think that Christ Church went through a terrible period in World War II. It was a heart-rending time. Father Chilson took it very seriously. He knew people who were war heroes, and he talked about them. He preached a great sermon. But he also preached America. And I can recall that we would sing the Navy hymn every Sunday. Every Sunday we sang the Navy hymn. And the church bell didn't ring. We never rang the bell after December 7th, 1941. It was the civil defense signal for invasion. If the church bells were to ring, then the Germans or Japanese would have been invading. So it never rang. But the excruciating thing was to hear the names. And he always read the names of those who were wounded and those who were killed. He never, and I can recall, I can recall when Mrs. Fred Marish was here and heard her son's name as one of the boys who had been killed in action. And it was, I was at the time replacing Bill, the sexton. I was maybe 11 or 12 years old, and I was the sexton for the church. I got up early in the morning and came down and turned the heat on and cleaned the church and did all of those things. Bill McLean was in the Army, and he had gone away and left the job. And Father Chilson asked me if I'd do it, and I did. And that's a thing that really got to me about our Lord. And I really love God. I really love Jesus Christ and the things he does for us. It was Christmas time, and we used to put up holders, candle holders in the whole church. And I didn't know where they were. I couldn't find them. I asked Father Chilson. He didn't know where they were because Bill had put them away. We didn't know where they were. I looked all through the basement. I looked all through. And I came in here. As Father Chilson said, you know, when you're in trouble, go someplace and pray. Well, I figured this was about the top place to go and pray. So I kneeled before the altar and I prayed. I said, you know, I got to find these things. They got to have the Christmas service, and we can't do them without. So I need to. And that little voice that goes in your breath said, go out the back door. I walked out the door and walked down Ramapo Avenue. And over to my right, I looked into the snow. There was a lot of snow. And there was a glint in the snow. And I looked, and it was a lock. And I reached in, and I had a bunch of keys. You can't believe how many keys I had. But I went there, I picked an obvious-looking key, and I went into the lock. It snapped open, and I threw this door open. And I walked down, and there were all the candle holders standing. And I stopped right there, and I said, thank you very much. It was good. I call that my Christ Church miracle. It was something that was very special. We were talking about World War II and the seriousness of all of the things. On the night of VJ night, I was in the Guild Hall. I don't know whether they still call it the Guild Hall, but it's the Guild Hall. And I was refinishing all of the Sunday school tables, and I was doing the floor. And my father came in, and he said, we better go listen to the radio. And he said, the president's going to speak, and it was VJ night. And Father Chilson came in, and he said, we got to get the radio on. We had a little old radio down in Bill's office in the basement, and so we all went down there and turned it on and listened, and the president said that the war was over. And Father Chilson said, I want you to come up into the sanctuary with me. And I did, and we went back. He put the rope in my hand, and he said, you ring the bell, because you're the future. And I rang the bell. And it was the first time they had rung in 4 years. And then people started to come in. We had people come in. And then my dad and I and a lot of other people went uptown. And I remember somebody pushing my father in a wheelbarrow down the street. I had my trumpet, and I was playing Anno Pompton and God Bless America, and a couple hymns in there too. So that was kind of the most important night of my life in many ways, and I never forget the look on his face of it was relief. He gave me a book called We Thought We Heard the Angels Sing, with the story of Eddie Rickenbacker when he was out in the ocean for so many days. So those are the kind of things that happened here. Father Chilson, beside being Hap, had the other epithet of the in the diocese. He was called the junk man of the Newark diocese, because he had an old station wagon, an old Woody, and he and I would go around on garbage day, and we'd pick the best that we could find, and he would do something with it. He never picked anything up that he didn't fix and do something with. And I recall with a great deal of humor when there was a flood on Pompton Lakes, was teeming with water, and there were boats coming down there, and we went over there on the shore, and he had me up to my hips in water pulling these boats over, and he was explaining to me the rights of salvage. And I think he got 3 boats, but of course they were probably from Moa, and he did stuff like that. But he was a very, very skilled mechanic in many ways. I remember a Sunday morning, we got a call from the priest at St. Mary's Church, and their oil burner was not working. And they knew that Father Chilson knew about oil burners. And so we went over after the first service in the morning, and he canceled Ringwood, and he went over there, and he fixed that. And I don't remember what it was. It was something in one of the orifices or something. And in the process, of course, we both got oil all over us, and we came back to the sacristy, and we tried. You just couldn't wash that smell off you. So he said, well, the congregation will think that's the incense of the Lord. And we went on and did our service. And Father Adrian, just loved him for doing that. And he did many things like that. He fixed things. We had to fix the furnace here all the time, because during the war, there just were no parts. There wasn't anything. And I came at 4:00 in the morning to turn it on, because it was essentially off during the rest of the week. They had enough heat in the guild hall in there that the bathrooms and so forth didn't freeze up, but the church was frigid, I did not get to the point to tell you that when I was a senior in high school, I believe, I might have been a junior, Father Chilson asked me if I would go over to General Theological Seminary in New York City and see if I had the vocation to be an Episcopal priest. I did. I went over. I spent a week. I wore the cloak of the students and went to their classes with them, and I ate in the mess hall with them. And I didn't feel that I had the vocation at the time. And God made that different later on. He got me when I was a little older. One of the funny things that happened, there was always something going on. I was with a young member of the Church of God, of the Church's Army, and I don't remember what his name. I wish I did. And at the time, I had a bow tie that you could, and it would light up. And guess what holiday it was? Pentecost. So when the priest at the General Seminary said, and the tongues of fire came down, I flashed my lights, brought the house down, and I thought I was going to get killed for but and this old monk, Friar Dom Gregory, who was an English monk. He was from the Benedictine order, and this is the order that the Episcopal Church and the Catholic Church share. That they've always been in communion, even in spite of the Reformation. And so Friar Dom Gregory said, I think I'm going to add that to my vestments, And that was, and then when I went to college, I went to the Episcopal Church in Holland, Michigan, and I had to defend the Episcopal Church there. And so a lot of things I learned here, and a lot of things I learned there. And I said to my history teacher, don't go after me about the Reformation, because the Church of England shall always be free. And he didn't, and he became a very good friend of mine. But I went to St. Paul's in Kalamazoo, and followed through. And whatever I had came from here. Whatever I had came out of here, came out of the Sunday school. My Aunt Esther was a teacher in the Sunday school. Ladies all had to wear their hats. Yeah, when you came in church, had to put the hat on. Didn't have a hat, they had little doilies back there that they could put on their head. They were serious about that. I don't know whether they chuck them out, but they were pretty serious about wearing your hats.
Had to have a hat, mandatory.
Mandatory for a woman to wear a hat. That was no other way. And there were just we had great times together, and we cried a lot during the war. And I just have never forgotten those boys, because they were just a couple of years older than me, 18, 19, Warren and the Weatherwalks boys and all of them. I was watching Saving Private Ryan the other night, and I had to turn it off because I started to think about those other times and other people, and it got to me. I want to tell you, there was a lot of more formality. You wore a suit, and you wore a suit and a necktie, and you looked presentable. There were no such things as coming up in shorts and so forth. And the ladies, dressed nicely. And up in Ringwood, it was the same thing. Nobody came to work with overalls on. Nobody came to church with overalls on. They dressed, and again, the ladies with the hats. And of course, it was the old English things. They were the old basic of the Episcopal Church, and that's the way it was. I would say that we were half filled here, or a little better than that, almost every Sunday. Christmas Eve, you couldn't get a seat. You couldn't get in here. And on two occasions, the front rows were taken up by the Jewish congregation. They came over, and I don't recall what the reason was, but they came and sat here. My friends were here, and that was and Father Chilson kept very close relations with the other ministers in town. They knew each other, and they worked together to do God's will.
Father Burns?
Yeah, Father Adrian Burns.
Yeah.
And Father Burns would walk with me in the morning sometimes when I was coming down to clean the church. He would walk from their church all the way down here with me and talk. And he'd say, "Tell Hap I said hello." And, Reverend Heemstra, another great man of God, Reverend Garrett Heemstra, was at the Reformed Church, and they all got along very well, and they all did the job that they were supposed to do. It was tough times. It was a very tough time. It was tough to be a man of God because you didn't get much money, and the parish didn't have much money.
38.
My daddy never made more than $5,000 in his whole life. $5,000 a year, and at the time we're talking about, a $10,000 a year man was a big guy. The man in the gray flannel suit made $10,000 a year. Everybody else, and there were times when people made $5 a week. And this church is still here because Albert Chilson knew how to do it. He knew how to do it. And he had a good boss. God was helping him all the time. And he never, as we worked together, he never let me forget that Jesus was in charge of everything. We were just doing the work. So that was a very important part of our life, my life. My cousins grew up here, Dorothy Messler and Winfred Messler, and all of them came here. My aunt Esther was Mrs. Santa Claus one time when I was about 7 years old. For some reason, they couldn't get anybody to play Santa Claus, so she was Mrs. Santa Claus. And when I came up to her, I said, "Hey, it's Aunt Esther," and my mother said, "Shh, don't tell the other children," you know. So, but it was a difficult time, but everybody pretty much held together. I mean, Marie Rydell is a name that I love. This lady was a school teacher at Pompton Lakes High School, taught French, but when my mother was unable to come out of the house anymore, Marie Rydell was always there to visit with her and talk with her and be with her. And the folks from Christ Church visited her regularly. And it was as though she had church every Sunday. They came in with the communion and things like that she treasured. And even though I was kind of away from the church at the time, it was something that I really believed, I really saw. So, and then when I had my epiphany and I got out of the saloons, all of the things that had happened here came back, and they enabled me. They gave me the I'm chaplain to 5 fire departments and 2 police departments, and I feel very, very thankful that God lets me do that. Took me out of the bar room and put me in church, and so the vocation that I didn't have when I was 16 was really there. I have learned a lot, and I thank God. And I thank God for this church, that baptismal font where I was splashed when I was a kid. Praise God.